I'd like to start off with the point that you ended up on, and that was the Economist magazine article in May 2000, which said, Africa, headline, Africa, the hopeless continent. Way away. That was a turning point. Because if you look at the graphs, you will see the black graph here is Africa's economic growth. The red one is advanced economies, and the gray one is China. And you will see that May 2000 virtually marked the very point at which Africa started disassociating itself from the advanced economies and beginning to outpace them. And ever since then, it has completely outperformed the advanced economies. But you will also notice from the graph that the gray graph at the top is also a very important contributor towards this, and that is the enormous growth of the Chinese economy over that period and the extraordinary demand for African resources that has resulted in a huge increase in the importance of China in African relations. The impact, however, has been absolutely astonishing. You can see how the GDP in dollars, billions of dollars, has trebled in North Africa and quadrupled in sub-Saharan Africa over the period 2000 to 2012. Average income per capita, even in purchasing power parity terms, has risen by about 50% over the past decade. Now, there has been a lot of criticism in recent times about the fact that this growth has not been equally diffused across all members of society, and that it's only few, the so-called middle class, who have been benefiting from this high growth. And I will relate that further on to one of the warnings that Baroness Chalker made, and that is that, unless the continent actually develops its human resource capabilities, that will remain the case of an unequal period of growth that will result in simply more and more inequality and greater political tensions. But for the moment, let's be very grateful that we are seeing the development of a fairly substantial consumer class that is driving an extraordinary amount of economic growth across Africa. And you will notice from these, what I've taken are the IMF forecasts for economic growth over the next 5 years and worked out the average annual growth rate. And you can see it's across an extraordinary broad range of African countries that are doing very well. As a South African, of course, there's also another factor that is a little disturbing, and you will see that near the bottom of the list, second last, is South Africa itself. And Baroness Chalker hinted at the need for a wake-up call in the government of my country to the fact that it's becoming a very competitive environment, and that South Africa cannot just sit back and think that it will retain the leadership of the African continent indefinitely. I've done an exercise if one projects these growth rates going forward, then by the year 2022, Nigeria stands to overtake South Africa as the largest single economy in the continent. And in fact, just last week, there was an announcement by Nissan Renault that they were going into partnership in Nigeria to assemble motor cars. It's the first time that there's been a decision to produce cars in a country other than South Africa. And I wrote a piece that said, is this going to be a seminal turning point in South Africa's economic history that sees it passing the baton of leadership to other African countries, the most obvious being Nigeria, partly because of its huge population.